Advanced technology is intersecting with national security and U.S. China great power competition in unprecedented ways. From the race for dominance over futuristic biotechnology to the fight for global control over critical mineral supply chains. I'm Guy Taylor, National Security Editor at The Washington Times, and for this edition of the Threat Status Influencers series, we're back on Capitol Hill in the offices of Senator Todd Young, an Indiana Republican who's emerged in recent years as a leader on some of the most nuanced aspects of this competition. He's a U.S. Naval Academy graduate who also served a decade in the U.S. Marines, and he's gotten a reputation as a bipartisan problem solver since entering the Senate in 2017. Senator Young has been instrumental in bringing microelectronics policy to the forefront of national security. He co-authored the 2022 Chips and Science Act that has reshaped how the U.S. competes with China on futuristic technology. Senator, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
Let's jump right into this. You're a member of the Select Committee on Intelligence, and you really are among the most active senators in terms of creating legislation at the technical center of U.S. China competition. What do Americans need to understand about that competition broadly? Why should they be concerned about it? And how far-reaching has this competition become at this point?
Well, that's a great question, because oftentimes I'll work on U.S.-China policy, and it's important to me that my constituents understand why they should care. And what I always emphasize to them is that this competition is currently shaping our lives in fundamental ways and is poised to shape our children's lives in even more fundamental ways, economically, in terms of our national security and every other facet of life. So what do I mean by that? China does not play by the rules. They don't play by economic rules. They don't abide by long-standing norms of behavior when it comes to national security comportment. They seek to undermine existing institutions and shape those institutions in ways that supplant the existing system of rules that we have called the rules-based order since World War II, and replace a system of rules with basically a law of the jungle. That would be advantageous not just to China, but also other countries that are led by autocrats like Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and many others. So the competition we're involved in typically does not manifest in the national security realm. Instead, it manifests economically when they steal our intellectual property, when they engage in economically coercive behavior, when they force transfer of technology so that our businesses can do business in China, in many other ways.
One of the areas that you've drawn attention to is this national security aspect of rare earth elements and critical minerals. These are things that are essential to advanced technology, everything from fighter jets and submarines to advanced missile systems. You've been pretty outspoken about the fact that China currently controls something like 85 or 90% of the global capacity for processing rare earths, essentially monopolizing supply chains. How did this happen, first? And then second, what is the national security risk to the United States?
Well, this happened because we naturally, as a country, were wedded to the market. We understood the power of the market. We thought that the rules of what we call comparative advantage should be allowed to work, and that if another country could produce a certain product at lower cost and the same value, we should work with that country. And those economic rules work if you have countries that play by the rules and don't subsidize different products. Don't flood our market with products below the value of cost of production to put our businesses and our workers out of business. So we didn't accommodate our economic policies to modern realities in which you have certain countries, in this case a very large adversary country, China, that doesn't play by the rules.
So is that happening with rare earths and rare earths mining?
So that happened absolutely with rare earths and rare earth mining. In the case of rare earths and other critical minerals, China has been engaged in a concerted effort really for decades now to seek out areas of the world. Africa is one classic example where places in Africa are mineral rich. They have not only gotten access to the mines, but they've developed over a period of time productive capacity so that they can process these minerals. And then they've actually been warehousing minerals as well. So they have vast stores of rare earth minerals and other critical minerals that they provide into the American market. And these are key inputs as we electrify our economy. And they're also key inputs to other important manufactured goods like defense articles. So we literally cannot produce our defense goods without access to, for example, rare earth minerals. 99% of our rare earths are processed, so their final end-use product come out of China.
In March of this year, you and Senator John Cornyn introduced the Critical Minerals Security Act. Does that act have bipartisan support, first of all? Second of all, what does it ultimately call for? How does it address this problem?
Yeah, so this legislation, and we've tried to tackle this problem through many different vectors, uses our existing mapping tools in the United States through the U.S. Geological Service to identify what resources exist around the world, especially in countries that are friendly to the United States. And we offer those services to our allied and partner countries. And we indicate we will use our tools to figure out what resources exist under your surface if you give our companies first right of refusal to extract those minerals, to process them, and to work with you to build wealth. Of course, that builds resiliency for our own economy at the same time.
You brought up the presence of rare earths in Central Africa. It is a reality that the Chinese military, as well as other great power actors, mercenary Wagner Group forces that are aligned with Russia, and a lot of non-state, local players, state and non-state, that are sort of vying for control over this resource. Should the U.S. be more present militarily on the African continent to try and influence the situation?
I think security guarantees may be necessary to protect some of the most valuable mineral resources. But I actually think our point of emphasis should be to offer a better value proposition than China offers. Now, China's approach has been very extractive, almost neo-colonial in approach. They buy off key members of the governing parties in African countries, mineral-rich countries. They extract their minerals, and the locals seem to get very little benefit for this. So what I have proposed, and this would be another piece of legislation, is an effort to empower the president to negotiate sector-specific free trade agreements. So in this case, there would just be mineral agreements, and they would have a lot of predictability for financial markets and mining businesses if Congress were to give sanction to these agreements. And then we could use a tool known as the Defense Production Act to help companies invest in processing capacity in these countries. Of course, their workers would work in these processing facilities, and they get paid very high wages. So this would establish mutually beneficial commercial relationships and enduring relationships so that we would have a lot more certainty about how to get access to rare earths and other minerals.
I want to pivot to another area that you've been drawing attention to, which is biotechnology, this futuristic world of biotech. You're actually the chair of the Senate's National Security Commission on Emerging Biotech, which is really looking at this intersection between emerging biotechnology and national security. What are we talking about here when we say biotechnology? Are we talking about cyborgs and AI connecting to the human brain? Are we talking about agriculture, the weaponization of viruses? Is it all of the above?
Well, you know, it is all of the above, because all of that touches on or is grounded in biotech. Biology is biology, biotech is biotech. And one of the things that I've tried to emphasize as I work on the national security dimension of biotech is we're not in the main talking about pills or seeds. So ag bioscience or biopharma. The U.S. still leads the world in that space, although it must be said, China, through a form of brute force economics, where they're throwing a lot of bodies and a lot of resources at biotech, they've become quite sophisticated in this area, so we have to stay on our game. But the same science that's used to make those seeds and pills can be used to make next generation Kevlar, can be used to make shelf-stable blood that our warfighters could conceivably take out into the field and save more lives in the process. China has been investing very heavily in this space in some areas that I think would give us pause. Super soldiers. They're experimenting with designer babies and unique traits. And that scientist was pulled out of the lab, is back in the lab. So we have to assume our adversaries are going to continue to invest in these areas. We won't violate our own norms of behavior or our own ethics, but we do need to up our game in some of these key areas. So our commission has come up with roughly 50 recommendations, half of which are focused on going faster as the United States, particularly in the area of bioindustrial applications, regulatory optimization, giving DoD more authorities to buy biotech-related products as opposed to other types of manufactured products. There's many more recommendations. Then the other half of the recommendations was how can we get China to go slower in terms of their biotech enterprise.
How do we do that?
Well, we've got to stop allowing their scientists, their best-in-class students into our universities, into our labs. So we place a lot of emphasis on that. We need to up our game as it relates to our intellectual property enterprise more generally. We need to improve our testing and our regulatory atmosphere so that businesses won't flee the United States and try and go to market in the area of biotech in countries like China or other countries. So we need to continue to invest in our research enterprise at a time when, frankly, we are fiscally constrained, but this has to be a priority.
Let's pivot one more time here and talk a little bit about maybe a more conventional issue of great power competition, which is shipbuilding.
Yes.
There's a lot of concern in national security circles about China's expanding Navy, its naval shipbuilding capacity. President Trump has actually vowed to dramatically expand U.S. shipbuilding. You've been a leader pushing bipartisan legislation that's a little more focused on the commercial side of shipping.
Yes.
You did this with Senator Mark Kelly. It's called the Ships for America Act. What is that about, and what do we need to understand here about global commercial shipping and this U.S. China competition? Where is China compared to the U.S. on this?
Well, this is an acute situation, and our objective is, the tagline is, we need to make American ships again, right? Which, of course, the president has embraced, and I'm glad he's focused on this problem set. But essentially, what we're trying to do is we're trying to unlock more private investment in our existing shipyards in this country. If we can open up some dormant shipyards or even establish new shipyards, potentially even on the Great Lakes, to make merchant vessels, we need to incentivize the training through our skilled trades, through our existing training institutions of very skilled craftspeople, welders, shipwrights more generally. And then we need to train more merchant mariners. So this is a comprehensive effort to ensure that we have the shipbuilding capacity, we have more U.S. flag shipping companies, and then we have trained merchant mariners to man those vessels.
You've actually written recently that there are currently 80 U.S. flagged vessels in international waters compared to 5,000.
5,500.
This seems like such a vast gap. How do we make movement on that quickly?
Well, Americans who are concerned about this and focused on this shouldn't be discouraged. We don't aim to have the same number of vessels as the Chinese. They've overproduced, I would argue. But we do need to have sufficient capacity that in time of war, we can use those trained, skilled craftsmen who are building merchant vessels to build more Navy vessels. We need to have some spare capacity that can be utilized there. So this is a dual-use national capability that we aim to stand up. We also can't be, in times of peace, economically coerced by the Chinese. And unfortunately, on a near daily basis, we are subject to coercion by the Chinese Communist Party and their leader Xi Jinping whenever he's unhappy with the United States or wants to gain leverage in a negotiation. He can threaten our access to their markets by not dedicating vessels to global trade and threaten to starve our economy of certain key inputs. So this economic coercion does not just involve, we discussed rare earths and other critical minerals, it's also the transport of things to and fro in a global economy.
How concerned are you that this competition leads to a conflict? And is there a way out of it without there being ultimately a military clash of some kind?
Yeah. So I subscribe to the peace through strength mantra. And for me, that means being prepared for a war. Right now, we're not prepared for a war in the United States. Use shipbuilding as an example. The fact that we don't have sufficient capacity to survive a long war scenario, meaning something that lasts longer than a few months, we're not prepared for a contingency in which we need to repair and build new vessels in a conflict that lasts much longer than a few months. So that ought to be troubling because it invites aggression by our enemies. And so that's why I'm focused on this. I want to avoid that conflict. I want to avoid coercive activity by the Chinese when it comes to our semiconductors or our critical minerals, which is another form of conflict. It's a gray zone sort of conflict, a bit short of war. And it's time that we harden ourselves right now. And if we can just optimize our system against this one large adversary country that doesn't play by the rules of the game, but continue to use comparative advantage and trade with other countries, I think that's our path to being peaceful and prosperous at the same time.
Senator Todd Young, so insightful, so interesting. Thank you for your service. Thank you very much for joining me for this edition of the Threat Status Influencer Series. I'm Guy Taylor. Until next time.